Hello everyone, I'm Broughy1322 and this video will showcase the fastest cars in the GTA 5 Supercars class, organised first of all by race tier and then by lap time within each tier, with the top speed of each vehicle also shown in order to identify any outliers. All 62 supercars have been put through their paces on my testing track and top speed run, and we'll be going from the slowest K tier cars to the top S tier in this video. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on future testing of new vehicles added to GTA 5 and beyond, and check out other classes in the playlist. This video is brought to you by Broughy.com. This is my website where you can find all the info you need about me and my content, from a fully documented catalogue of my videos with chronological playlists to live streaming plans and much more. Go straight there with a link in the description and pinned comment. So as we see the vehicles in the Supercars class that aren't usable in regular races, it's important for me to let you know that the intro video to this series, which is linked in the description and pinned comment, likely answers any questions you have about this testing. From simple things like what car upgrades are needed to maximise performance and what HSW stands for, to more complicated things like why I use off-road wheels and overall testing methodologies. Give that video a watch if there's anything you don't understand here, since everything there is assumed knowledge for this video. When it comes to the non-raceable vehicles, it's pretty much the same story as it always has been. The Rocket Voltic is the slowest, with the Scramjet in the middle and the Vigilante on top, but now it seems like we've got cars that are even quicker than that. So first of all, the K tier for regular raceable cars, and there's only one car here, the Bullet. The poor Bullet, always alone at the bottom of the class. At least it's not last place for top speed for the Supercars class, but has always been in last place for lap time, unfortunately. And then we come straight away to the J tier, which also only has two cars in it, not very many for these early tiers. With the Taipan, first of all, with a 105.6, it's already out nearly 2 seconds per lap quicker than the Bullet, and a decent top speed for the Taipan, which is what gives it that balance with the Voltic, which is our other vehicle in this tier, because the Voltic has the worst top speed of any supercar in the game, but it's slightly quicker in terms of lap time, so interesting balance between the two. Next up is Tier I, which contains 6 vehicles, which is pretty impressive for, one of the lower tiers in the class, especially as we just saw the first two only had 1 and 2 cars each. The Champion starts us off with a 104.5, and its top speed of 125 miles per hour is pretty decent, but it's not as good as what we see from the Adder, which has a top speed of 126.25 and a slightly better lap time. Really nice car to drive, the Adder. The same can't be said for our next vehicle, the Entity XXR, which its advanced handling flags, even though it's got a really decent top speed, it's only on flat ground, and as soon as you get it into the city on the bumps, it's really not a very nice car at all, just wouldn't even consider it. The Sultan RS is next, which is a good all-rounder I think, but its top speed does let it down, being in 56th place for the entire class. Decent enough lap time, got decent acceleration, some tracks will suit it, but it's kind of the polar opposite to the Banshee 900R, which has a really high top speed and it's good enough for the top 10 in the Supercars class, but it doesn't have an awful lot of grip. It's also got the joint biggest discrepancy between lap time and top speed positions in the entire class, with a difference of 43. But ultimately the Vaca is the last vehicle in Tier I. Again, another good all-rounder, let down a little bit by its top speed in comparison to the other cars in the tier, but it can certainly compete with that lap time. Alright, Tier H now, and the Entity MT joined the Banshee 900R with a 43 position difference between lap time and top speed, which is the highest in the entire class. It's got a top speed good enough for 7th in the whole class, but it handles terribly just like the XXR. Let's just disregard its existence, because without the Entity MT, the Tier H just becomes a tier where all vehicles have 3 characters in their name and all end with the number 1, which is pretty cool. So we got the GP1, then followed by the SC1 straight away, which is only one of 2 cars in the class to have exactly the same place for lap time and top speed, with 48th in both. And the final car for the tier is the 811, which has a crazy high top speed but not very good in the corners, so again you've got that kind of balance between more all-rounded vehicles with the GP1 and the SC1 and the high top speed vehicles that ultimately make a balance on a balanced track. So we've got 2 absolute classics to start Tier G, with the Infernus followed closely by the Cheetah. Can't separate them really, and you never have been able to since they've been introduced in 2013, but they're both kind of spice picks in terms of the G tier, because they're just a little bit off the pace of the other vehicles in the class. If you can extract the maximum from them, you will be able to compete with them, but the other vehicles just have a little bit extra, especially in the top speed terms, and in general performance overall. Speaking of top speed, the Italy GTB Custom is also in Tier G. It's slightly quicker in terms of lap time. We're getting close to the 1:02 levels right now, which are very quick lap times if we just got a lot of vehicles all close in. But the 127.5 miles per hour is easily the highest top speed for any vehicle in this tier. But then we've got the Reaper, which is a little bit quicker for lap time, less top speed, generally probably the best all-rounder for this tier, whereas the Penetrator that ultimately gets the best lap time for this tier, it certainly struggles a little bit in terms of straight line performance, but it is the most grippy, so again another interesting balance. Alright, time for Tier F, and I think this is probably one of the best tiers for racing in the entire game, probably second only to the E tier that we're about to see for the Supercars class, and maybe some of the sports tiers. The Entity XF, it is 41st place in Supers now, the previous king down in 41st place. It's kind of crazy that it has fallen so far with all these DLC vehicles. And then the Turismo are just ahead of it with a 101.5 in 40th place, generally similar top speeds and performance. Between the Turismo R and the Entity, you're going to have a good race, but again, like with the Infernus and the Cheetah earlier, they are kind of spice picks for this tier. So the FMJ is next up with a 101.4, so only about a tenth quicker, but it does have a bit of an edge in terms of top speed on the cars that we just saw. And that is kind of the same story for a lot of the vehicles in this tier. They've got very similar decent top speeds of sort of the new breed of 125 to 127-ish range, which really just gives them a little bit extra over the older vehicles that we saw, like the Entity and the Turismo, which generally stuck around the 122 range. The Xeno is here with 128 mile per hour top speed, but it is very difficult to drive this one and very difficult to extract the maximum from. That 101.3, that even though it's close to the top of this tier, it's not the easiest one to get. The Cyclone is the one that bucks the trend here with a 101.312, but its top speed is the second worst in the entire Supercars class with only 116, but obviously its acceleration makes up for it depending on the track. And then finally the Italy GTB is at the top of this tier, only 1,000th of a second quicker than the Cyclone, but a much higher top speed, and again you get that interesting balance depending on the track. Now time for Tier E, which is probably one of the best in the entire game to race with 10 cars. Starting with the Tyrus, the lap time for the Tyrus would suggest that it should be in the F tier, but it has such good grip and traction with that high downforce that it would just dominate every race in the F tier, so it's better to have it as a spice pick in E because there will be some traction limited tracks where it will just dominate even here as well. And then the next 6 cars in this tier, starting from the Zentorno with a 1:08, are all separated by 1/10 of a second. It's absolutely crazy. And this is the biggest tier for the entire class, like I said, with 10 cars. There's a great variety to race with, probably the best of any tier in any class for close racing, with such varied cars that are basically all relatively nice to drive. The Tyrus obviously started off with all the grip, but then after that we just have such small differences in lap time as you're seeing between a lot of these cars, and ultimately any of them are viable in a lot of races. The top speeds obviously vary as well. We've got the Nero Custom, which is basically a better version of the Nero, probably the best all-rounder for the entire tier, and then there's a Russell, which is again quite somewhat of a difficult one to maximize in terms of the performance, similar to the Xeno in the previous tier, but it still managed to get that 1:08 lap time, which a lot of cars are doing. That 1:08 has so many cars centered around it. One of those obviously is the Osiris, which is still a great car, into the top 30 for the Supercars class, but it is one of those older breed of Supercars that has that sort of 122-ish mile per hour top speed, which doesn't really do too much in comparison to some of the newer breed of Supercars that have much higher top speeds. The same is true of the T20, very similar top speed, very similar lap time to the Osiris, such good balance between those two, and there always has been. And then we move on to the Tesseract, which gets a 10th of a second quicker than the T20 in terms of lap time, which given the state of this tier, that's huge, for a huge leap in terms of lap time, but a 10th of a second really isn't all that much. It is a lot bigger than the gap between the X80 and the Tesseract though, of only 1,000th of a second for lap time, and again a very nice top speed for the X80, which really helps it out. but ultimately the best all-rounder for this tier, and probably the one I would recommend most of all, is the Furia. It gets the best lap time, its top speed does let it down a little bit, but it's just a really nice car to drive, the Furia, and it's probably the best for most people in most situations for this tier. Tier D now, and similar to what we saw with the Tyrus earlier, the ETR1 gets a lap time that's only 1,000th of a second quicker than the Furia, which suggests that it should be in the E tier, but the ETR1 has such a high level of downforce and such good cornering abilities that it would dominate most E tier races, so better to have it in the D tier where it might have some play depending on the track type. The D tier is actually quite strange because it has the biggest variation in car types to be so close together on lap time. For example, the DiNmiTe HSW, which is the first HSW car we've seen, it has a massive top speed, but it's held back by bad grip and the advanced handling flags that it has and it inherited from the XXR. It's kind of the polar opposite of the ETR1, yet their lap time is only a tenth different. And then we come on to sort of the more normal cars, I guess, in the top three. On more fast-flowing tracks that are traction limited, the Vision and the ETR1 are going to do well in this tier, while higher top speed tracks will suit the HSW Entity and our top vehicle, the Divest 8. Meanwhile, bumpy city circuits and tighter technical tracks will bring the Tempesta more to the fore. This is a tier where the best car is probably going to be determined by the situation more so than anything else, with only a more balanced track bringing them close together. We had 5 cars in Tier D, and we also have 5 cars in Tier C, and it's also the first time where we see the sub 1 minute lap time. So the top 19 cars in Supers all managed to break that 1 minute barrier, and by a substantial margin straight away from the Autark with a 59.7. Great grip, relatively decent top speed, lacks a little bit in terms of acceleration, which the Cyclone 2 definitely doesn't do. This is the non-HSW version getting a 59.6, but its top speed is only good enough for 55th in the entire class with 119.25, so it's let down a little bit by that, but still, you know, it's got that good balance with the rest of the cars in the tier. The Taygon is similar to the Autark in terms of it's all about the grip and the cornering, but it also has a decent enough top speed to back it up, and that's what we're finding with a lot of the cars as we get higher up here. They're just good in most areas, whereas some of the cars that we've seen previously in lower tiers have major deficiencies elsewhere. The Torero XO with the 131.5 mph top speed is the fastest non-HSW supercar in the game for top speed, 5th place overall, and then the final car for this tier is the XA21, again one of the older breeds with a lower level of top speed, but great cornering grip and great acceleration as well, and a good all-rounder for the tier, although I personally prefer the Torero XO. We're getting to the sharp end now with the B tier, and first up we have the Virtue, which has the second biggest discrepancy between lap time and top speed positions with 40, kind of the opposite way around to what we saw with the non-HSW Entity MT and the Banshee 900R, where the Virtue has no top speed basically, but a really good lap time because it's got great acceleration due to the fact that it's an electric vehicle, so certain tracks will allow the Virtue to be competitive. It's just going to depend on, you know, the makeup of the corners of the circuits. The RE7B is the kind of a perfect example of what we're going to be seeing from cars going forward most of the time. Really big grip, like with the S80RR as well, but decent enough straight line performance to also bring it all together and allow it to happen. But with these high downforce, high grip cars, they are quite difficult to extract the most from. So for most cases, it might be better to go for a more normal car like a Thrax, for example, which even though it's a little bit down on top speed, you know, it's relatively respectable. With a 58.8, the S80 was the first point that we saw a sub 59 second lap time, and the Thrax is one of the more normal vehicles that's higher up in the order. It drives just like, for example, an Osiris or a T20 or a Tempesta. The same can't be said for the Wagner, which is an absolute grip monster, but it also has a great top speed, and you can still see why this was the #1 supercar for a long time. It does still scrape into the top 10 for supercars for lap time, but yeah, there's 9 that are quicker than this now. One of those is the Ignis, which is a bit of a surprise, but it's just got such good acceleration to go along with pretty much everything else that it has in terms of it's probably the most all-rounder best vehicle for the tier, because it's like a normal vehicle to drive, similar to what I was talking about with the Thrax. Ultimately though, the quickest lap time for this tier does fall to the LM87 with an excellent top speed as well. It's one of the best picks for the tier, but it is also, like I said, with the high downforce cars, very difficult to extract the most from. And now we come to the A tier, which, while it isn't the top tier for the class, it does contain the fastest non-HSW supercars, although we will be starting with an HSW car with the DiNmiTe 8. It sneaks into the A tier basically due to its top speed. It's still a big, bulky, unwieldy DiNmiTe 8 that doesn't like to get around the corners, but it could be the choice on top speed oriented tracks for A tier races. The rest of the tier contains cars with basically no weaknesses, the pinnacle of non-HSW supercars, and the DiNmiTe 8 is actually the last time we see a 58-second lap time, as you can see with the Krieger of 57.9, which is absolutely crazy lap time levels. Top speed of 128 is really nice as well. One of the easier ones to extract a good time from in the A tier, the Krieger, but not as nice as it used to be when it was first released, when off-roads helped it to have a smoother ride, but still more than competitive in the A tier, and its relatively high top speed helps it as well, especially for stunt racers, although the weaponized Ignis might be even easier to get a lap time from because it's basically a slightly quicker and more easy to drive version of the regular Ignis. Next up is the Turismo Omaggio, the newest supercar. It is very quick, very grippy, and much easier to drive than our number one car, but that top speed is a bit of a worry with it being the worst in the A tier. To be honest though, this car might be the best option for a lot of people given how easy it is to extract a good lap time from, especially for A tier races. But ultimately, it's still ProGen who we look to make the fastest car, just as we used to back in the day with the T20. The Emirates gets the fastest lap time from a non-HSW car and has a decent enough top speed to back it up. It has an incredible amount of grip, but it's probably one of the hardest cars in the entire game to master and extract the maximum from. However, we still have one more tier to go, and the lap time gap is quite substantial. You see, for the top two cars in the Supercars class, we have to look to HSW upgrades to give them their maximum performance, and we basically just skip over 56-second lap times entirely, going straight to 55.8 seconds for the Cyclone 2, which again, because that top speed makes it the fourth quickest supercar, but in comparison to our number one car, it's just a little bit down, but ultimately the Cyclone 2 has some incredible acceleration which gives it that lap time, but it just doesn't have the same levels of grip of our number one car, which is the HSW weaponized Ignis. Kind of crazy that we've got such a weaponized vehicle that's the number one car in the Supercars class, but 0.6 of a second per lap quicker than the Cyclone 2 with a 55.222. It's the quickest car in the entire game, short of the quickest open wheeler. And yeah, it really goes. This is what happens when you put an HSW upgrade on a car that is already in the A tier. It just absolutely dominates. And I think if you're only going to have one supercar, it would be the weaponized Ignis, because whether HSW is turned on or off, it doesn't matter. You will always be competitive. If it's turned on, you'll use the HSW version. If it's turned off, you have it for the A tier of races essentially. And as we see the comparison here at the end, it's kind of crazy to realise that, the Vigilante used to have the quickest lap time for any car in the game just because of that crazy rocket boost. It's 10 seconds per lap slower without the rocket boost, but it's so powerful that it gives it that 55-second lap time. But it's crazy to think now that we've got a normal car that outpaces it. Even though the Vigilante catches up on the final straight with the boost, it's still not enough to beat the HSW weaponized Ignis to the line, and the same is true for top speed as well, as we'll see. The Entity MT and also the DiNmiTe 8 as well, which are the top two fastest supercars for top speed, they have top speeds that are higher than the Vigilante, at least in terms of, your traversal across the map. The Vigilante might get up to 160 for like a split second or whatever when you get the boost, but across the map, it's not the quickest way to get it around anymore in terms of top speed, and there are cars even quicker than this in other classes as well. And that is of course something that we will be exploring with this series. The first one is out of the way, the supercars, the fastest supercars for 2024. You've got all the lap times, all the top speeds, and hopefully you've enjoyed it. We've got plenty of work still to go, but I'm really happy that this first video is now out there. Sport cars will be next, then we'll move on to muscle, sport classics, coupes, and just go down the order. And yeah, I hope you all be here for it. Make sure you subscribe for all that kind of stuff, and so you're notified when these new videos go up. I will be doing 2024 lap time and top speed videos just like this for all of the classes one last time. And yeah, it's going to be a journey, I think, and I'm really looking forward to getting it all out there, really, and getting all these new times and top speeds showcased so that we're as accurate and up to date as possible. And ultimately that's everything for this video, but please consider supporting on Patreon or become a YouTube member if you want to support this work and get some extra perks for doing so, such as early access to videos and other testing results. And remember to read the description for more info, comment with your thoughts, like the video if you enjoyed or found it helpful, and subscribe for more. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.